Hello, everybody, and welcome to This Week in Cloud Computing, Episode 4. I am your host, Amanda Coulong, and in studio with me, I have Mark Jeffrey, my wonderful co-host, and we also have Phil Lieberman over here to my left, who is the CEO and the president of Lieberman Software.
Hey.
How are you?
Great.
And we also have on Skype, unfortunately you won't be able to see him, but you can hear his voice. We have Archie Reed of HP. Now, Archie, you have a very interesting title. What is that?
So, thanks. I actually am called the Chief Technologist for Cloud Security.
I like that, Chief Technologist of Cloud Security. We'll get into that in a little bit. But before we start, I wanted to make a few announcements. If you're wondering about the other shows on the This Weekend Network, we are holding them off on Friday because This Weekend Startups with Jason Calcanis is going to be at South by Southwest. So on Saturday, if you would like to tune into that, the show will be held at the Six Lounge in Austin if you're actually on site at South by from 4 to 7 p.m. Central Time. So make sure you tune into that because Jason will be chatting with Tony Hsieh of Zappos. So that will be quite an interesting chat, and it will be a live audience as well. So make sure you check into that. But of course, next week, regularly scheduled programming will commence.
And you may be there, I think.
And
right?
I may be there.
Yeah, I think you're going to be there.
I know, and so will you.
I'm definitely going to be there.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So you will have the team there. Other quick things, too, if you would like to contribute to the conversation while we are here chatting, you can join us on Twitter, which is at TWiCloudComp. And also, we have the chat room. So if you're watching, just log into the chat, and we'll probably throw up some of your questions and address them here with the group. So, and final thing, sponsors, of course. We have two fabulous sponsors, Verticore and Storm On Demand, who gave us these great little guys here today. See them?
Anyway.
So we'll get into that
You can
later.
see we enjoy our toys.
Yes, we do enjoy our toys. So we had the RSA Security Conference last week. And lots of focus on the cloud. I mean, the security in the cloud just took over RSA. And I would like to begin with each of you, both Archie and Phil, talking about your respective announcements that you made at RSA and, a little bit about what your companies are doing. So why don't we start with you, Phil?
Sure, sounds good. Well, at RSA, we had a great time. We announced a version of our product for the cloud. We do privileged identity management. Mm-hmm. So what we're announcing is something we've been working on for about 6 months now. Specifically, it has been the idea of doing multi-tenancy in the cloud. The message that we were sending out at RSA was this idea called from the iron to the application. And one of the things we've been trying to deal with, and we've been doing this in the corporate environment for quite a while, is the idea of the root accounts and the administrator accounts all the way down from, say, the KVMs or the remote access to the console, through the hypervisors, through the operating systems, and then up through the stacks, and then finally down to the applications. So we actually do that already. The part that we've been working on for the last 6 months with, or 6 months I should say, with some of the cloud vendors has been implementing this idea of multi-tenancy. And the idea is, for example, who actually manages the security in the cloud? Is it the cloud vendor, or is it the user, or does it get shared between those two?
Which is something we will be discussing here today.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but even more, here's the other question. Okay. What about the auditing? And then the question is there transparency with the cloud vendors? Or is it security by obscurity, the idea of trust us? Our feeling is that if people are going to move to the cloud, the one thing that they really have to be worried about is that they had a physical perimeter when they had on-premises. They go ahead and move on to the cloud. And now the issue is what is their physical perimeter?
Right.
And what about the auditors? What do the auditors get a chance to see?
Yeah, there is no cage. So if I move into the cloud, so basically with Mahalo, we have a cage. And you can't go in, I mean, it's a physical cage, not like a virtual cage with a lock on it. You can't get in there and go touch our stuff unless you have the combination to that lock. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark. In fact, some of the things we were talking about at RSA was the issue of things like certificate authority and PKI, and the issue that you have to have physical perimeters in place. But more importantly, companies who want to outsource to the cloud, they're going, well, we could save money by doing this, or we can spin up a lot of systems by doing this. But then the question is what are the control mechanisms that they have in place? I mean, the auditor comes in and says, well, tell me who had access to the system at 2 in the afternoon, and why?
Right.
Who knows what goes on at the cloud vendor? So what we're announcing is this idea that we have software and a process that gives access to the auditors and then also provides, well, it answers this question, do the right people have the right access at the right time for the right reasons? The idea of, hey, trust us. I don't know any business that really should be operating under the idea of trust us with the most important information, but we're not going to really tell you what we're doing with it. So effectively what the solution does, it's a solution for cloud vendors. It's designed to scale up to hundreds of thousands of systems. And the other thing is it has an auditor portal. So the auditor can go in at any time and say, well, I'd like to see machine XYZ, and I'd like to see user ABC, and I'd like to see what they did on those systems.
Is the customer the auditor also? So can I go in as the auditor?
Absolutely. It's the idea that it should be multi-tenancy. Both,
I see. So both of us can.
Absolutely. Here's the question. The cloud vendors have to have auditors who are going to audit what the cloud company is doing with their infrastructure. And then the same thing with the users, that is the corporations. They've always had auditors going along, but they have to have a way of going in and seeing what's going on with their systems. I mean, essentially they're renting space. But they need to establish a physical perimeter, and they need to have a way of auditing that physical perimeter. And the question of saying, well, we're SAS 70, don't worry, it's okay.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. This is what I was talking about last week. I hate this security by obfuscation, and this is something that would worry me about putting Mahalo in the cloud. It's exactly this. The issue of transparency, the fact that I can't see into that, that's a closed box. I don't know what's going on inside of it, and that freaks me out as a CTO. I don't like that. So this sounds very interesting to me. I'm glad you're addressing these issues.
Now, I want to get briefly into your background specifically a little bit too, Phil, because it seems pretty darn impressive. We have on here, you're a trusted advisor to the U.S. Senate's Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee.
Well, we discuss stuff with a lot of different people.
He says stuff. Discusses stuff.
Well, we're actually talking about this at RSA. I was doing an interview there, and there's this idea about the government and the private sector, and there's this idea that there are these gigantic secrets between the government and the private sector, and I think there's a misunderstanding that both actually work together, that both gain from the relationship. So the fact of the matter is that government gains a lot from all of the work that we're doing, as well as other companies are doing in the security sector. But we gain a lot from them. For example, we go through penetration testing as an example, and some of our clients who are involved in DoD in some of the areas come up with the most interesting, really bizarre attack vectors that we've never seen before. And so, we kind of work with them. It lets our products get a lot better as a result of that. But there's like this constant interchange that's going on, that it really is a partnership.
Okay. I like that. That's a really good point. I want to switch over to Archie. Archie, I know that you guys, HP, released a survey at RSA, correct?
Well, it's a little bit more than a survey. And
all right. Well, let's hear it.
Yeah, perhaps a little background here. This is something we sponsored through the Cloud Security Alliance, and certainly, as we've just heard, whenever you talk about the cloud, sort of the, shall we say, gut reaction, the visceral reaction from a lot of CTOs and CSOs is security as a main concern, right? So what we've done as HP and a bunch of other companies, we were there at the founding of the Cloud Security Alliance, and we put together a whole bunch of guidance about what to look at, how to look at it, but the issue of what are the top concerns that people are seeing or really afraid of and how to deal with them was sort of left a little open, shall we say. So we commissioned a survey and worked with the Cloud Security Alliance to basically release what we're calling the 7 deadly sins of cloud.
Oh, that's scary.
It's not meant to be scary. It's meant to be sexy or something like that.
It gets my attention. There you go.
The attention. That's right. So, but the official title is a little bit more mundane than that. It's the top threats to cloud computing.
Oh, I like the 7 deadly sins much better.
So it was, shall we say, fortuitous that we came up with 7. Because the idea of this particular bit of research is that it will roll forward and will be updated. The current version, and I'll get into what those 7 deadly sins are in a second, but the current version focuses more on the technology side than on the business risks, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And we didn't want to preclude the business risk, but we wanted to have a little bit more time to analyze what they really were before we rolled into another version of this. And we hope that we'll update it every 6 to 9 months on that sort of cycle. There's a lot going on in the Cloud Security Alliance to try and manage all this stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll talk about that in a bit, but let's just talk about these 7 deadly sins for a second. The first one that we had up was abuse and nefarious use of cloud computing. And the idea there was certainly the old adage that why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, there's a lot of folks looking at cloud computing saying there's a lot of interesting data in there. And there's a lot of ways in which we can make use of all of these arguably unlimited resources relative to what we have today. So if we can get in, we've already seen the botnets in Amazon's web service. We've seen various use of some of the other rack space type solutions, and they're running wild out there. It's not that scary, but it is something that needs to be addressed, and it is a concern. And we try and elaborate on how you can minimize that threat. Another one is insecure APIs, or application programming interfaces.
Which is huge, because APIs are huge right now, especially when you think about software as a service.
Yeah, especially what Google's doing.
Up and down the platform. It's even to go to storage these days, there's a number of initiatives to create APIs to access a disk, as it were, a virtual disk over the cloud. And then you go up the stack and you start to think about, well, how do I get my data into these systems? And there's a lot of programmers writing a lot of APIs out there. Many are not necessarily using software development life cycles that support security, and if they do, they probably give short shift to security because it's a functionality that's more important in a lot of people's minds.
Right.
So there are a lot of APIs out there. And then on top of that, you get the issue of, well, certainly when I've spoken to a lot of folks, when you look at APIs, they often think of only the front end. They think of things like, if it's a web interface or some sort of HTML payload that's coming over, that's my API. They forget that you can put data into a system via email or somewhere from the back end. And so the API definition is more akin to, how do we get information into this system or out of this system, and how can we attack that?
Right.
On that note, the third one was malicious insiders. I've seen, and I'm sure you guys have too, various surveys out there that say the insider threat is greater than the outsider threat.
Right.
While at RSA, I heard one of the lawyers say that that had actually switched around now, and the outside threat was much greater than the inside threat. Whichever way you look at it, certainly one way in which outsiders can get to the value that's there is to bribe, socially manipulate, and socially engineer the insiders, right?
Yeah, typically hacking is done through social engineering, at least a lot of the times. It's really hacking the people, not the machines.
Yeah. And so I was on a panel where we were talking about these sort of things, and I actually got in a little head-to-head with Aaron Feigenbaum, who's Director of Security for Google Apps, where he was sort of saying that, you know, an attack in the cloud, whether it be insiders or the Operation Aurora, which I'm not sure whether you guys have discussed yet, but that was the attack on Google from, shall we say, a rather large foreign nation.
China. Yeah, we discussed it on the first show. I think it was the first show.
All right, so you guys know all about this. Yeah. And Aaron was basically saying that all these sorts of things are not attacks on cloud computing. And so we certainly got into an argument about that, which was essentially, you know what? An attack on someone like Adobe on their products means the distribution has to happen on each individual system. An attack on someone like Google or even HP, who's providing cloud services at various points, one attack can affect a huge multitude of people and companies. So that insider attack can have a great impact on a huge number of companies, even when you're doing public sector type stuff, you don't know the extent of the impact to the degree that you should.
Well, hey, Archie,
Yeah.
with regard to Google, did they take any responsibility for their use of common administrator accounts with the same password being the cause of their Aurora attack? That if they had implemented proper internal security, they wouldn't have run into this problem.
So again, it was an attempt to sort of gloss over that, and they had good development processes. I don't want to sort of nail them to the tree because a lot of other companies suffered the same sort of attack. But they did say that there were lots of lessons to be learned and lots of things that they were doing to improve their development process. So arguably, yes, they took that on the chin, and they're working to avoid that.
Okay. We
That makes sense?
take a quick break and talk a little bit about our first sponsor today.
Sure.
Which is Vertacor. We're actually going to start with Vertacor today. So is your cloud hosting provider letting you down? Take a look at managed private cloud solutions from Vertacor. More secure, more reliable, more redundant than Rackspace or Amazon. A managed private cloud solution can easily replace your current IT infrastructure and eliminate IT pains. Completely avoid the cost and hassle of buying and maintaining IT equipment and software. Deliver 100% uptime for end users. Configure and deploy computing resource in just minutes. With Vertacor, your private cloud is hosted in the most advanced and secure data center on the planet and uses only best-in-class hardware and software and gives you access to virtually unlimited bandwidth. Vertacor's team of experts monitor and maintain your private cloud 24/7 by 365, freeing your internal staff to concentrate on supporting only your applications and projects that can help grow your company. Vertacor is at vertacor.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to catch the last of these 7 deadly sins. So if Archie, if you don't mind finishing those up, we can add those to the chat.
I'll try and be quick, shall I?
That's okay.
I would like one of the toys, but I can't actually see them. So
Well, we can put them
We'll hold them up later. That's
we'll
with our
put
second
them
sponsor, so-
right up next to your camera for you.
okay.
Look at those guns.
So,
Yeah.
All right.
are you quite done now?
Yes, I think
Yes.
we're right. I think we're
All
right.
right.
So yes, please tell us more about the 7 deadly sins.
Okay, we're on to the 4th deadly sin now. Shared technology vulnerabilities, and that's what we've seen in terms of the already proven attacks on virtual machines, the VMMs, the virtual machine managers, but also any sort of common infrastructure. And again, not to pick on Google per se, but when we look at Google Apps and the email system that they provide for all of their corporate customers, and then you look at Gmail, all that underlying infrastructure is exactly the same. So on one hand, you've got the argument that says if there's a vulnerability in that, everything's compromised. And then the counter argument to that, just so we understand and we're balancing this out, is that they only have to fix one thing if something goes wrong. So, that's some understanding that's required there, some acceptance of risk, and the opportunity to fix a risk a lot quicker. Okay? Yep. Then of course, I think these are not in any particular order, mind you. And when I generally talk to people, this is, once they got over their visceral gut reaction, this is generally the first thing that they come up with as being their concern. It's data loss and leakage. So I work a lot internationally in Europe. There is a data privacy directive out of the EU, and privacy is seen as a right, and the protection of data is paramount whenever you go to an external source, let alone managing your own internal stuff. So data loss and leakage can often pertain, when you go internationally, to PII, or personally identifiable information. When you talk in the US, that data certainly has value and is often sold on because our privacy laws here are all over the place. But they're more concerned about IP losses, I would say financial record losses and things like that.
Right.
So you also have to consider the audience and what regulations they're under to understand which parts of data loss and leakage are important to them. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Last two, account, service, and traffic hijacking. This is just the classic things where somebody gets hold of an administrator account, they compromise the password, they get hold of the traffic through man-in-the-middle attacks, and all these have been proven out in various cases, and we give examples of those in the actual document itself. The final one, I don't know whether it's a cop-out or not, but there's this thing called the unknown risk profile. And in that, it's, I guess, a little bit of a catch-all that we put in there, but the idea is you don't know what you don't know. And that's one of those trite things that we often try out in security.
That's a really good point.
This is while the technologies that we're using are all pretty well known per se, the combinations are creating environments where things can happen, unexpected things. The amount, the size, the scale of things that we're plugging together here, and then you throw in the access from anywhere, from a device or a PC or whatever it may be, and you start to get situations where it's just so complex you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So that's sort of our final one. As I said, the point of this is to roll forward and invite people in from industry and customers to help us continue this research. It goes in line with a lot of the other Cloud Security Alliance stuff we're doing in terms of you guys were just discussing the requirements for audit and monitoring and things like that previously. There's the A6 initiative, now known as Cloud Audit, which the Cloud Security Alliance is also sponsoring, and its goal is also to drive forward standards about how to log things, how to show audit data, and probably lines up quite nicely with that previous discussion. I have a lot more we could talk about, but I think I better give you guys a little chance to digest that.
I've got some questions actually about this.
Sure.
So we talked a little bit about the Cloud Security Alliance last week.
Right.
That was actually the first show we brought it up. And so it sounds like you've done a great job of profiling the fears. And we also talked about the biggest reason why people are not adopting the cloud faster. 50% of people just feel it's insecure, or they're afraid to do it because they just don't know what exactly is going on under the hood there. And that's my fear, so I can completely identify with that. And it sounds like the Alliance is basically come up with the 7 biggest fears. What I don't hear from you guys, from the Security Alliance yet, is how are those fears addressed? How do you make those fears go away from me? Basically Phil has said, we will give you transparency. And this is one of the things I talked about for a couple shows. I want to see the metal. I want to see what's going on as deep in as I can see.
Right.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
I'll address that directly and
Please.
say that in the document we actually have remediation for each of those threats, recommended remediation steps that you can take. But in terms of the cloud environment overall, and one of the things I do when we're out there, I often say, let's not use the cloud. Let's talk about something a little bit more tangible. If you want to see the metal, in cases like storage in the cloud, which is part of infrastructure as a service, then the way in which the cloud providers actually create the unlimited expandability, the scale, the speed of provisioning, is to obfuscate a lot of that stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
Yep.
So you've got a direct challenge there between the idea that you can go and touch the box.
Yeah, I know what I'm asking for something that's not easy.
Yeah.
Maybe even impossible.
And I think it's going to become even less easy, because as the scale of these things goes up and the management tools become better, the issue is not so much where is it, but how can I control where it goes. In that example, if you consider the privacy directive that I alluded to before from the European Union, they have a lot of requirements on companies that host data. You're not allowed to move it across borders to certain countries. You're not allowed to have certain countries access that data remotely, because that's seen as the same thing. And it's more about putting controls around the data. And that's something else that we're working on both with the CSA and beyond as HP, is how do you create metadata and an environment wherein you understand how the data is being used and where it's being used, more so than can I touch the iron.
Okay. Let me ask another quick question. So, Phil, are you part of this alliance?
No, we're not.
Okay. Now, why is that?
Well, we send them an email, but they don't respond to their emails.
Okay. So, is it? I mean, basically, is it because you have to be like a Cisco or
Apparently.
a Microsoft or something like that?
Yeah, I
to be
mean,
part
we
of it?
actually lead the space in privileged identity management, and we actually sell to all the cloud vendors. So we're not sure. We're actually partners with most of the members in the Cloud Alliance already.
Okay.
But for some reason,
Do you know what the requirements are?
Yeah, you just have to sign up. So I'm not on the monitoring the email job, but
Okay. Yeah, we're not holding you personally
No,
responsible.
not
Just
you.
so
I'm
we're really
just
clear.
wondering how people
But
get
I'm just
involved.
trying to get an idea of like who is in this and who is not in this, and how can little players be a part of this as well as big players?
there are a lot of players in there now, and certainly if you go up the website, we have the membership page, and we've got lots of folks in there, lots of large players, lots of small players, and if you want to talk about identity in the cloud, just as an example, we've got Ping Identity there. We've got Google who provide identity in the cloud, arguably.
Right.
There's small companies like, or arguably small companies like Zscaler. You mentioned Veracode. So it's not that hard. I can't really comment on why.
Okay, fair enough. So you would like to be part of this, though, wouldn't you?
oh, sure, yeah. In fact, I read the Seven Deadly Sins at the RSA conference. It's a good paper. But the one thing that I think really needs to be brought out is a lot of the cloud vendors know what to do, but they're not doing it. I mean, here's the question. Common administrator accounts, they set all of their machines in the cloud to the same password on every single machine.
Yeah, well, that's clearly very silly. It should never have happened.
But, they're going, well, we're not going to buy any tools because we have to be the low-cost provider. I mean, it's kind of like crazy stuff that we run into, or NIH.
Do you think that the alliance is adequately addressing these issues?
Well, I think the Seven Deadly Sins paper is a good paper. It's a great paper, but I think they need to call out the cloud vendors and really bust them on some of the bad behaviors. I mean, right now...
But the cloud vendors are the ones that are part of the alliance, so they're clearly...
Actually, I'm not quite sure. Most of them seem to be hardware vendors and product vendors, not necessarily the cloud suppliers themselves.
Okay, so you think...
I would agree with that categorization, but I will say that right after I did a session at the Cloud Security Alliance at the RSA, I indeed asked of the audience, and we had roughly 300 people in the room. We had to turn away 200 people who were interested to hear what's going on. I asked them what they were doing about dealing with these particular issues, and we sort of went through a couple of them, and indeed they largely dismissed them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's then up to the customers to try and force this on the vendors, because these guys are making big money and big noise giving what they're giving. People are willing to accept it. Now, whether that's the average startup that's going in and saying, well, my VC wouldn't even talk to me unless I came in and hosted on Amazon, so I've got to take what I'm getting. Or it's a large company that is willing to take the risk, small to medium enterprises more willing to take the risk, arguably, and deal with the lack of SLAs or the minimal SLAs, the minimal security that's there, because they're getting the cost benefits, and that's their risk equation.
Well, Archie, one thing that we see ourselves is that many of the vendors are claiming that they're SAS 70 compliant, but SAS 70 is a voluntary internal audit. It's not externally verified. And the question of who's doing what, when, where, and how on the cloud environment is not really being addressed, or very few of the vendors are being transparent about that.
Totally agree. And I often refer to SAS 70 as being the I'm good, I say I'm good sort of certification. You can get third parties to come in and validate that, but the reality is SAS 70 deals with a specific bit of security. It allows you to write your own ticket, as it were, about what your processes are, and then decide whether you want to get a third-party validation. It's all over the place. If you're dealing with healthcare, you've got to deal with HIPAA. If the privacy, the data, the security regs here in the US are all over the place, And it's the same when you go for these security certifications. They don't address everything. So it's really difficult to come down and say, I've got this one thing and therefore I'm secure, because you're not going to be able to address everybody's concerns.
Archie, do you think the Cloud Security Alliance will ultimately have its own stamp of approval, so to speak, that really does address these? And so if you have that stamp,
like
then...
good housekeeping.
Yeah, like a good housekeeping stamp of approval.
Good electronic housekeeping.
So, yeah, certainly. We
Is that a goal?
just this year initiated some research into that.
Mm-hmm.
And we are, maybe it's not the Cloud Security Alliance that does that stamp, but we are looking at a cloud cert.
Right.
Right, we are looking at cloud audit and how to bring all those things together into a good housekeeping seal of approval. Yeah. So it's on the table.
Right, and yeah, because it sounds like that there's a real need for that.
Right.
Especially because we need to be making sure that people are educated on these differences and that there is no standardization.
The problem, though, is that people are going to disagree on what the standard should be. I have a feeling Phil has a very different idea than Archie does, even just the two of you individuals.
Not necessarily. I mean, one of the questions is organizations like CACS and ISACA, even things like COBIT need to be expanded in terms of how the cloud's going to be audited. What are the records going to be? What are the findings? For example, if you go to a KPMG or you go to a Deloitte, they've got to be able to go out and look at that architecture that customers are integrating with. And they have to be the ones who come up with findings that really explain what's good and what's bad and what needs to be remediated and what, in fact, are the risks. The question is are the auditors really capable at this point? Do they have enough information? Do they have enough transparency so that they can go into the cloud and say, these are the findings, this is where your risks are, this is what you need to mitigate?
Archie's saying we don't know what we don't know in a lot of instances. So
even if you go to SAS 70, and you get one auditor in on a Monday and another auditor in on a Friday, you could possibly get two very different answers.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's all over the map at this point.
Right? Sure. So we're trying to put in some cloud controls derived from the guidance document, which is actually an 80-page document that a lot of companies worked on. We're looking at mapping that to the ISO 27000 series, COBIT, PCI, HIPAA, to help with all of these things. But as I say, we haven't decided whether to create in the CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, the stamp from them, because this leads into another point. Straight after I did the CSA thing, I walked upstairs at RSA to the Kantara initiative, which is primarily about identity. And I have a very long background in identity management, and there were 300 to 400 people sitting in the room, and I asked them how many people had looked at the Cloud Security Alliance stuff. It has a huge section on identity management as being critical to cloud computing management. 9 people out of 300 stuck up their hands.
Wow.
So in all of this, in all of the standards that we possibly have, there's still a lot of effort that needs to happen with the people who are actually working on them to come together and not try and recreate stuff.
Absolutely.
There was an article just the other week.
Hey, Archie, let me just interrupt you really quick because I'm hearing something that I'm not sure what it is. It may be the flight of these little guys.
The flight of the little men.
Yes, we have lots of fun on the show. It's a very serious show, as you can see.
See, it's a serious show.
Except Amanda's going to read this time.
It's my turn.
The Storm on Demand.
Yes, I'm not doing the voice.
No, do the voice.
Storm on Demand. So, Storm on Demand is an infrastructure as a service cloud computing platform that is powerful enough to replace dedicated servers. Storm on Demand is a proprietary cloud platform designed by Liquid Web, which you can see on our cups when it's back, one of the largest web hosting providers with over 12 years of experience. Storm on Demand is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2. The features include server setup in minutes, easy scaling, backup and restoration capabilities, and pay-as-you-go utility-style billing. Storm on Demand options include cPanel, Fantastico, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, fully managed servers, private networking, and much more. Storm on Demand.
Including awesome little guys.
Little guys.
Yes.
That we really like.
Oak Smash Cloud. All right. Anyway, back to the serious part of the show.
So, serious part of the show now. Serious.
All right.
Thanks for putting up with us, Archie.
No, I want some more sound effects. Every time
So
I make a point, I want the ding on the bell or something like that. Yeah.
I
Well, it's not a
know.
morning show. I mean, we're a little
Yeah.
ridiculous, but not that ridiculous.
Come on, it's the afternoon.
morning,
We've got to
guys.
wake everybody up. Very quickly, I would like to raise a quote here that came out of RSA, and it's from Brian Snow. And Brian is a retired government cryptographer and the former technical director of the NSA's Information Assurance Directorate, which protects U.S. information systems. And he said this at RSA. I'm not fond of the cloud either. You're renting an interface and you don't know what else is cuddling up to it. So you have to write your contracts very carefully, otherwise you are at great risk. So Phil, what do you have to say about that? Do you agree with him?
Do I agree with him? What's funny is we see a lot of contracts on a daily basis, and we've seen one contract that's particularly laughable, which is if we sell you a solution and it doesn't work, we're entitled to our money back. I'm not quite sure what the value of a contract is if the contracting party that you're involved with doesn't have any fundamental security, doesn't have any auditing, and doesn't have any process. I think he's absolutely right that you really have to ask a lot of tough questions. I think that in a sense, the onus really falls on the customer not to write contracts, but to ask really good questions about what's going on with their data, what's going on with their security, who's doing what. They really need more than contracts. They need transparency.
Right.
They need more than SAS 70. NSA are the smartest guys, on the planet when it comes to security, but a contract, assumes that both parties are coming into it with an equal footing. I'm not sure necessarily the cloud vendors are any better than some of the corporate clients. It's an interesting question that you bring up, which is that people going to the cloud are going there for scalability. They're going there to reduce cost. But the question is what's going on with the security when you move over to the cloud?
Yeah.
You had this glass house you started with. The idea is, do you really still have that same security? One of the issues we're talking about at RSA was the issue as to whether cloud vendors should be CAs or certificate authorities, and should the applications in fact be part of that so that all of the endpoints become secured.
That's an interesting idea.
But the problem is right now that the cloud vendors are not CAs.
No.
They're expecting third parties to go out. So the question is, how do you reestablish a physical perimeter or a physical logical perimeter around your data, around your applications? How do you really know what endpoints are communicating with you?
Yeah, this idea of establishing a physical perimeter or reestablishing it again, it's sort of counterintuitive to a lot of computer-oriented people who are used to abstracted things. But last week we discussed, the various laws in various countries. It's come up again this week. In Europe, privacy is regarded as a right.
Sure.
It's not, just sort of a nice to have. It's a gotta have, and you go to prison if you get it wrong. And so reestablishing physical borders just for that sake alone, not necessarily even about security, but about privacy, seems to be more important than I think a lot of people guessed at first.
Well, this is really one of the questions about the Cloud Alliance, which is they need to really advance the idea of better physical security. If you don't have physical security, you need to implement something that provides authentication and non-repudiation. And in fact, that makes sure that
non-what? Say that again.
Non-repudiation. In other words, it's the idea of saying, if I say I'm you, I have to have a way of proving that I'm really who I am, that I'm not really somebody else. This whole idea of man-in-the-middle attacks, all of these issues have all been solved by PKI technology. The problem is that the cloud vendors haven't really implemented this public key infrastructure system. They're sort of putting their hands off to the whole thing. In fact, many of them have a hands-off attitude when it comes to security. They're saying, look, you're buying air conditioning, you're buying electricity, you're buying compute power, but when it comes to security, that's your own problem.
Right. So now, all right, so I have a question for you.
A lot of people are getting away with saying that it's what people are willing to accept.
Right.
So regardless of whether we come up with the recommendation, and you, me, and a bunch of industry folks saying this is the way it should be, is not going to necessarily change that. And similarly, what I'm afraid of is that we will also see a bunch of legislation come into play that basically says really dumb things about what you've got to do if you want to use cloud computing.
God, let's
so
hope
Yeah, let's
we've
hope
got to be
not.
very careful about all of this. We've already seen legislation come down the pipe that says you've got to encrypt things, and I think it was Maryland or something that I'm probably misquoting, but essentially they said that the state or the feds needed to own the keys. And that was in direct reaction to a data breach.
Right.
Now, similarly, you've got PCI regs out there, which is coming from an industry body, which is more to protect, shall we say, the card system people than it is to protect us. And you can look at that regulation, and it says if you're using wireless, you've got to use this key and this WEP type and all that sort of stuff. And it suggests that the regulation was essentially a reaction to a specific breach. So we've got to be very careful about how we go about this and what is right. And then we'll also see, I believe, that we'll get tiered offerings in the cloud. We'll get people who are willing to take on that responsibility and provide guarantees. Because right now, if you go to someone like Salesforce.com and ask for their SLA, it's going to be a long pause because they don't have one. They're just going to point at their history. This is our uptime, and if you're okay with that, here we go.
As is.
Right.
Right.
And they're getting away with it. They're making millions a quarter, and they're happy with that.
All right, so let me stop you there for a quick second. I have a question for Phil. So Archie, in our discussion earlier, we talked about how I wanted to see the metal, and he says, well, by definition, the cloud is an abstraction away from the metal of all, basically of your applications, right? So now you are claiming that your service allows me to get the transparency I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
How do you do that? How do you balance these two things against each other, and how exactly do you blind me with your science? How does your magic work?
It's not so much about science, but here, look, you're still talking about a PC. You're still talking about a server.
Right.
You're talking about a lot of them. And you're talking about the idea that it's still a PC. Fundamentally, somebody can walk into the data center, walk up to the machine and access it.
Yep.
The question is, if the root password on all of those machines is the same, and somebody at the data center is nefarious or evil and wants to get into your data, you as the customer have no idea that this is going on. If the cloud vendor doesn't do segregation of duty, doesn't implement security within the data center, saying that every single machine for the physical access has a different password. Not only that, to get to that password, you have to pass some gates. There has to be some auditing. There actually has to be a reason why you're going to gain access to that. If you're buying compute power or you're buying PCs on the internet from the cloud vendor, which is kind of another model. In fact, that's sort of the problem with the cloud is, are you buying an ASP model? Are you buying 5 machines, 10 machines? Which machines? Are you buying a specific group of machines? Are you floating between machines?
Right, so you're saying get rid of that virtualization. You're saying go back to the physical machine layer
You always
and
have,
segregate that way. Is that what you're saying?
But you always have the physical machine layer.
Well, you do.
It doesn't go away. It may be abstracted away
the
from
question
you.
is it abstracted from you as a customer or not?
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It depends on what you're buying from the cloud. Cloud vendors can offer you a group of machines which are physically located. Let's say if you're doing business in Germany, all those machines are going to be in Germany. Your application is going to run in Germany.
Right.
And your data is going to reside in Germany. In fact, they will physically isolate you to specific machines in a rack. Now the question is, who has access to those machines? You can get transparent access and controlled access and even shared access to the low-level access of the machine, even to the hypervisors and throughout the stack. So the answer to the question is that it's all possible. I mean, that's what our announcement at RSA was all about, is this idea that the physical transparency and auditing of physical access, it should be an absolute requirement. If I'm going to put my stuff out there, I want to know who's touching my iron. I want to know everything all the way up through the stack. I mean, look, I might say to the cloud vendor, fine, you take care of the hardware. I don't need to know what the password is to it. In another case, suppose even I say that. The question I might want to say is, I'd like to see who's been touching the iron. I'd like to see a record of that.
Right. Okay.
So customers need to ask Who's touching my iron?
Who's touching my iron? Who's touching my hypervisor? Who's touching my hosted operating system? I'd like to know who's involved with the stack. And there has to be clear rules of the road as to who has the root access accounts. Is it the cloud vendor? Is it the customer? Is it shared? And what's the auditing record between those two? The technology exists. I mean, that's essentially what we announced at RSA, is the technology to allow all of this information to be, well, all of these machines to be secured. You know, the whole idea of the Aurora attack, the whole idea of Configure, is totally unnecessary. The idea that a cloud vendor would set their machines up and be so open. I mean, the thing that really scares the heck out of me in the cloud is somebody would gain access to the KVMs or the IPMI devices or the ILOs or the...
Yeah, just before we get into acronym madness.
Okay,
so
but what these are...
talking about like switches, you can turn the power, so you can basically cut the power to the machines.
Yeah, but you know, here's what's really scary. There's a thing called ring -1. And this is somebody, it's primarily a government level type of attack. Somebody goes in and literally rewrites the BIOS on the machine. And they essentially insert their code. So effectively now everything is compromised.
You're beneath the operating system when you're in the BIOS.
It's like totally beneath everything.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we've seen situations where, for example, with Dell, all of their remote access devices have the password Calvin. So, and some organizations.
Did you just say that publicly?
It's up on the internet.
It's well known. If he's saying it, it's well known.
It's well known, absolutely. So now here's the question: if they're all set to Calvin and they've never been changed since the servers were deployed, if somebody finds that network and somebody gets access to that, they can essentially get to any machine. And then if they want, they can go and change the BIOS. Let's make the hardware do something a little different, something a little better for us.
Once the guy's got the BIOS, it's done. There's no getting it back.
So I mean, what we're saying is, you know, there is technology to make it so everything is different, everything is controlled, that there are records for all of this. So the technology's out there. The question is, somebody has to adopt it, and some do. Large companies do use this. I think, in a sense, the cloud vendors have to step up when it comes to security, just as large organizations have stepped up.
Archie, what do you think about all this? I know you're dying to say something. I can feel it.
Really? Is it coming through? So I agree that being able to control all this stuff is pretty important. In fact, my discussion with Google around who has access to what, and as a result of Operation Aurora, what were they doing about it, led to the example that was given around Gmail. They don't store an individual's mailbox on one server. They spread it across 10, 100, 1,000 different boxes, and then at some point they recompile all of that into something through the application layer. And so I said, okay, so we only have to worry about the application layer now. We don't have to worry about people pulling out servers. And that sort of got a laugh from the audience. And the issue remains the same as you move up the stack. If we're looking at sort of traditional ways of storing things, there was that example last April, I think it was, where the FBI went into, I think we call them a service provider, but they were hosting servers for various companies. They went in and grabbed over 200 boxes from a data center and literally pulled them out for one warrant against one company. They ended up taking down thousands of companies.
Didn't even think about the warrant issues.
Right.
I didn't begin to think about
that. When the provider went to the judge and said, hey, this is not good enough, it was dismissed. When an individual company that was taken out by that went to the judge said that wasn't good enough. They were given a warrant. They were told that they had to take out rack 5 to 70, and in they went. So there are lots of ways in which all this can fail, regardless of whether we've got protections in place or not, is sort of the point I wanted to make. And what we're trying to do through looking at all the standards, through saying, in the case of from boot, you want to be able to say you've got a trusted boot. There's a trusted computing group that has a way to do that. In the application, in the store, you want to make sure that you've got all that segregation of duty stuff sorted out, whether it's your particular identity management solution or someone else's. You know, these are the things that customers need to ask for, and if they can't touch the iron, then they need to understand the controls that are in place to minimize that requirement. Does that make sense?
Yep. So normally we do the Mark Laughlin group, but this is such a great discussion. I'm just sort
Yeah.
of just pushing it off and pushing it off. We're coming up. We're a little bit near the hour mark, but I think it's fine. I think we should just keep wrap this up a
good
little
stuff
bit,
here.
and then there's a little bit of news that we want to talk about. So we'll just So we will now do the news. It's okay. So
That was my sound effect.
that was our news opening segment. So, which do we have any more closing thoughts on the security stuff?
Well, the broadcast you had last week, one of the speakers was talking about Amazon and using credit cards, and the fact that, well, you should trust the cloud because Amazon is secure with your credit card, and that just really got me crazy.
Really?
It really
Why
got
is
me
that?
crazy because,
Did you agreed so violently with him? That
yeah, right.
Just wanted to
No.
come on the show and show you support for that? Or?
No, you know what was really bugging me about it was that there's a misunderstanding about the cloud, and something like Amazon or a live meeting, these are one-offs. These are specific applications. To say that this is a cloud-based app is not a really clear definition or an accurate definition of what's going on. It's a one-off application that was built to run on a big infrastructure.
Right.
But to say that because Amazon works at scale and it's a one-off that was built by a lot of really smart people, the idea is that, okay, well, if you have a bunch of programmers who just got out of school and want to do web or I'd say cloud-based computing, the question is, are they really qualified to understand all the cryptography and all the security and all the other things that need to be put in place in order to move your application over to the cloud? I mean, really, you can't really compare the two or say, if Amazon is okay in the cloud, you're okay to use Amazon and everything is going to be secure. There's just a lot of implications that you really have to sit down and really think through.
Yep. Okay. Any final thoughts, Archie?
So I would agree totally with that. My final point is one that was picked up in a couple of articles out of the RSA, and that was essentially that people need to say cloud a little less and be more explicit about what they want. Now, that's not just in terms of functionality, but also in terms of security. And just sort of leaving it to chance is not the way to move forward. So I think that presses the point that has just been made. And again, I say, cloud's wonderful, but until you really come down to what specifically are you looking for, whether you're a small company, large company, government entity, whatever, you can't really talk about security in the abstract and have it make sense. You need to come down to a specific instance, and then you can work out what security is applicable in that instance.
I would agree with that, just making sure we're speaking the same language. I mean, we've already seen on the show so far, everyone is defining the cloud differently and has different expectations for the cloud.
We've established that much, at least. If
At
nothing
least
else.
establish what exactly the cloud is to you and what you want from it.
So that's the advantage of my title, Chief Technologist for Cloud Security. I almost talk to anything.
Yeah. There you go.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, should we dive into some news
Let's
then
get
and
to
get
some
opinions?
news. Yeah, so stick around. We're going to do a little bit of
Yep,
news.
stay-
And
stick around.
I want to get you guys' take on this. So I've been dying to do this one story because, we've been talking about security stuff, but this was a huge week in the cloud computing universe just in terms of stories. The big one being Steve Ballmer announced that he's betting the company on cloud computing.
Saw that.
Yeah,
If we don't know who Steve Ballmer is, he's
Microsoft
the
CEO. Sorry, right. Sorry, I just assume everyone knows. So basically he's saying cloud developers, cloud developers, cloud developers. And it was basically a speech he gave at the University of Washington. He said the company is going all in with its strategy to move Microsoft products to the cloud. So the question is, first of all, what exactly does he mean by this? Does he mean Office is now in the cloud? All the, just forget the operating system. It's just, or at least that's a lot less important. What does that, I guess, A, what does that mean? And B, what do you guys think about that? I guess we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, actually, we've had kind of discussions ourselves. We do a lot of work with Microsoft. There's a really big question going forward, which is thinking about things like Office. That's definitely their cash cow, but the question is how do you compete against Google Apps?
Which is the other big story.
The other
But
big
anyway,
story.
Right, yeah, I mean, think about that. Google Apps, the idea of moving the stuff over and not having to buy Office, not having to update Office, but then consider things like collaboration. Microsoft has SharePoint, which is locally hosted, but then Google has the equivalent of it. It's really clear that a lot of people don't like updating their software. They like the idea of things being out on the web. On the other hand, it's kind of nice to be able to take your laptop with you when you don't have Wi-Fi and you don't have wireless service,
Right.
to have your data and being able to do your own work. But look, you read in the press and you see how many deals Microsoft has lost to Google. I mean, Google really trumpets it up pretty big. They don't want to keep losing Exchange mailboxes. They don't want to lose SharePoint. They don't want to lose their Office revenue. I think, the other issue that, in terms of working with them, is that many IT organizations would like to host their IT infrastructure in the cloud. I mean, think of big companies. The idea is that, it's almost an old saying that everybody hates IT. Everybody hates the IT people. And it's just this giant hole that they keep throwing money into. And there's always problems. And so the idea is that if you could move your applications over to the cloud, move all of your software that you purchased over to the cloud, it might make it less expensive, a little less aggravating. And in fact, you ever heard the expression "one throat to choke"?
Sure.
Yeah, we see that a lot. And so the idea is that if you throw it over to Microsoft or somebody else, you'd have that one throat to choke. And if there's a problem, you have one phone number to call.
Yeah, okay, so
That's a pretty big throat, though. Come on.
it is a big throat. I mean, what do you think about this, Archie?
So I think this is very much akin to getting ahead of the wave that they didn't quite do when Gates came out and said we're going internet, right? We're going to do everything internet. I think Ballmer's out there saying we're going to make everything cloud because it's not only the discussions that they're having with their customers, but it truly has that marketing buzz right now. And there are some new opportunities here. I really see that that's the way they're staying relevant and saying, keep talking to us because we know what we're doing. And there's a lot of companies that are doing the same thing. Now, at the opening of the show, you said that walking around RSA, looking at RSA, everyone was clouded. Or something to that effect. I took a walk around the showroom floor myself, and unlike previous years where I was seeing almost everybody do identity-based this and that, or data loss prevention this and that, I actually was quite surprised at the lack of cloudiness given how much this market has moved forward. So I was kind of interested in that. But on topic with Ballmer and the move for Microsoft into the cloud, I would say that this is truly the opportunity for IT in enterprise to stand up or get back at the main table with a business discussion around what they're doing rather than just a technology discussion, because I think this shows that the cloud is not just the technology that goes into it, it's also the business discussion that's happening.
Okay, so yes or no, do you think Ballmer is cloud washing Microsoft?
Cloud washing?
Yeah, just basically taking, it's not really, nothing's really different, he's just painting the word cloud on it.
No, they're spending some real money.
Okay, so they're serious.
They're real serious about it. The idea is that it's a blood feud between them and Google.
Yeah, agreed.
And they don't like them reaching into their pocket and taking their customers.
Okay, what do you think, Archie?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, so it's real. Okay, that's kind of what I thought you'd say. Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm so sorry, Amanda. What do you think?
Well, I'm looking specifically to Office, 2010 and the web version, and I'm a little bit saddened by the lack of basic features that you would expect to have in a cloud version of Office. Something as simple as syncing. Syncing the desktop with the online, that's not included. Things that I would assume Microsoft would include in terms of embracing the cloud aren't being included in, basic features of their flagship product.
Okay, so we can beat up on Microsoft and say this is only version 1 of that cloud stuff.
True. I mean, I know they're scrambling, and that's true.
We've got to wait a couple versions before they get it right.
True.
Well, there's
well,
another,
actually, I'm hearing something again. That I'm just going to tilt my ear in and see. You know what time? I'll do it this time. That's right. Storm on demand!
Can you tell how much he likes this, folks?
I just love saying it. It's just fun. So, and also, we have cool coffee. We have the real coffee mugs this week, so no more. This is actually Storm. I know it doesn't say Storm on Demand on it. This is actually the Storm on Demand or Liquid Web coffee mug. So, which is the company that makes Storm on Demand. So, Storm on Demand, stormondemand.com, is an infrastructure as a service cloud computing platform that is powerful enough to replace dedicated servers. Storm on Demand is a proprietary cloud platform that was designed by Liquid Web, my liquid in my liquid web cup. One of the largest web hosting providers with over 12 years of experience. Storm on Demand is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2. Storm on Demand features include server setup in minutes, easy scaling, backup and restoration capabilities, and pay-as-you-go utility-style billing. Storm on Demand options include cPanel, Fantastico, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, fully managed servers, private networking, and much, much more, and also little dudes. So, if you want to get some awesome cloud stuff, stormondemand.com. Thank you.
So wrapping it up then with the Google
Yeah,
story.
let's talk about the other one.
Because
So,
you've
I know,
been
I'm just
dying
to
the
do this one
entire
too.
show. You've been dying to talk about
No,
this.
okay, so yesterday, it was either yesterday or the day before, Google announced the Google Apps Marketplace. So for those of you who don't know, I'm assuming most people know this, but I always like to not assume anything. So here at Mahalo, we don't use Office. We actually don't use any, we don't use any of Microsoft typical IT products. We use Gmail, and we basically use Gmail as a service or an app, or basically an app that we rent from Google. And I think it's something like $50 a mailbox or something like that a year. And it comes with a suite of services. There's Gmail, there's branded Gmail, so all the email you see coming out from Mahalo.com is actually coming from a private Gmail instance. We also have the shared documents, all this other stuff. So what the Google Apps Marketplace is a place for third parties to now come and put their own apps on the Google Cloud, integrated with the Google Office offerings. And so so basically it could be interactive with your private Gmail. Your documents, one login, you could use your Google ID to log into it. So it's very much, and if you go and look at it, it looks very much like the Apple App Store. So just as you go in, you see scroll through the apps, it's the same thing. It's just now there's no IT department. It just exists magically up in the cloud, and you can just pay X amount a month for these various services and start using this stuff right away. Huge shot across Microsoft's bow. This is Google saying to Microsoft, it's on, and we're coming for your throat. And this hasn't been a secret, but this week, just sort of seeing both of them sort of dance around each other, like two little giant figures like this, sort of like that. I mean, it's really just been a whole different thing. Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, the cage fight I think is underway. What is your interpretation of this?
Yeah, no, I
What do you
totally
think about
agree.
it?
It sounds a lot like Salesforce, doesn't it?
It does.
With their app store.
Very reminiscent of
One of the
Salesforce.
things that I've talked to Ballmer about this particular issue, which is that when you take a look at what IT has to do today, you look at how complex applications are to bring up. You need a database, you need web services, you need to deal with virtualization. A lot of the IT departments have a huge load, and this constant onslaught of new versions, constant onslaught of new technology, and this is a big challenge for them to deal with. The idea of going to the cloud and not having to deal with this anymore is a really nice thing.
Yeah.
But clearly, the App Store thing, that was really interesting. That's kind of like a little shot against Steve Jobs, huh?
Yeah.
Just a little.
It was a great idea. I mean, we've all used the App Store. We all love it. It's just bloop, bloop, or very much like the Android market.
That's what I was going to say. Is Android? It's like the Android
market.
equivalent.
Yes, it is.
I think it's really smart. The idea of doing that. It's somewhat interesting because Microsoft has always been very ISV centric in terms of bringing their ISVs in. And
how are they going to do that with this? They couldn't really go ahead and That's your point.
Yeah.
They couldn't really replicate that. They would have to cannibalize their channel. All the people who've been loyal to them for years just go away because they're all disintermediated by something like an app store.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's another interesting question about this, which is they're based on the idea of systems integrators. They're based on local people providing the installation and configuration of servers and installation of software, doing updates and doing training. Something like Google or the App Store is really a game changer. It's sort of like the difference between Siebel and Salesforce, or Salesforce versus any other CRM
That's actually
system.
a very excellent comparison. It is the jump from Siebel to Salesforce. So.
I mean, it's easy. You basically bring out a credit card, you're online. If you want something cool, it's going to integrate, it's going to work. And again, one throat to choke. But I mean, here's a question I would ask you. When you're having problems with Gmail, how good is Google in terms of answering the phone and dealing with problems?
There is no
Exactly. We've
I
talked
don't
about
know who we'd
customer
call
service
for,
on here before, too.
But then again, Gmail doesn't go down.
I would also
Archie?
caution that this is not one throat to choke.
Right.
This is, if you look at some of the options they have there, probably their most popular example is the Intuit online payroll. When something goes wrong with that, if you're using it through Google Apps, you don't call Google at all. Not that you could for their apps either. You have to go to Intuit. So this whole platform is not as streamlined as you might expect if you're expecting one throat to choke.
Now, Archie, do you think this will change the rules for general security and IP protection?
I don't think so right now. I think what we're seeing here is Google's attempt to get into or move beyond just the platform as a service and get into the apps as a service, but establish themselves beyond someone like Salesforce.com, beyond what Microsoft may do with their specific apps. And the reason for that is if you go to Salesforce and they have all these apps, they're all tied to the Salesforce.com or Force.com platform. Whereas my understanding of what's going on here with the Google apps is that these are not all hosted by Google.
Correct.
They're hosted all over the place. So there's a difference in how they're tackling it. And
Is that true? Is that hosted on Google's infrastructure?
That was my reading of what they've announced.
We'll look into that.
I don't know. I read the opposite, but I might be incorrect.
If anyone is watching and knows, then definitely hit us up.
I'd love to know the answer to that, because that's an interesting question.
Because what they are doing is essentially creating a billing, a basic identity management framework around this, a setup, and then you can use these apps such that wherever they are, you can log in, you can manage them through one control panel. And those were the tools that Google were bringing to bear here.
Got it. Okay. Oh, we're sort of running out of time.
Yeah, we are. Any final thoughts, gentlemen? Philip?
Well, I think, the big question I would ask is that cloud vendors want to provide their service at the lowest possible cost. But the question is it worth the investment in security? And do they need to really get on the ball right now and start spending money and improve their security infrastructure and provide transparency? Or are they going to have to wait to some kind of catastrophic electronic Pearl Harbor to happen where they're knocked out of business, show up in court, or end up in front of the Wall Street Journal?
Right.
In other words, is there profitability in security?
Right.
And as I said earlier, I think what we'll see is a stratification or a set of offerings that people are looking for. Some will be very, very basic, such as the Amazon and the other sort of infrastructure as a service providers, where they essentially don't take responsibility for most of the security. I would also expect to see increased security offerings for government solutions, for financial solutions, and maybe in the community space. Community clouds are generally what they're called. So I did also note, I don't know whether you caught the news early last week, where essentially the GSA withdrew their blanket purchase order, the BPO, for the government cloud because of two reasons, they stated. One was things had changed so significantly in the last 11 months since they released it, and perhaps more predominantly or presently related to this discussion, security had become an issue. So, yes, I think we're going to see a lot of people who maybe jumped on this, realize that they didn't think about security, and maybe they do need to rethink what they're going to do. And that GSA BPO withdrawal is just a prime example of that.
Obviously, a lot of education that needs to happen.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I would like to thank my guest over here to my left, Philip Lieberman, Lieberman Software. And obviously, we have you on the line as well, Archie Reed with HP. And, of course, Verticore. Storm on Demand, our wonderful sponsor.
Yes, and I also like to thank NetDNA.com. NetDNA, we've actually been putting all of our shows on their CDN for the last 2 weeks or so, and sort of been in test mode, but it's running really well. We're really happy with it. So
yeah, thanks.
Thank you to NetDNA as well.
And of course, all of you, thank you for watching. I am your host, Amanda Coulong, and you've just caught us on This Week in Cloud Computing.